Welcome back to our Fox News Town Hall here in Tempe, Arizona, with former HUD Secretary and 2020 hopeful Julián Castro. Mr. Secretary, this past week, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand said that pro-life beliefs were essentially akin to racism and anti-Semitism. Was she right?
Yeah, I didn't see what she said. What I can say is
Here's what she said. I think there's some issues that have such moral clarity that we have a society decided that the other side is not acceptable. Imagine saying that it's okay to appoint a judge who's racist or anti-Semitic or homophobic. Asking someone to appoint someone who takes away basic human rights of any group of people in America, I don't think that those are political issues anymore.
Yeah, I'm going to focus on what I believe and let the folks, the viewers, know what I believe. And what I believe is that a woman should have the right to get an abortion in this country, should have the right to choose. And what we see happening in states like Missouri, Alabama, Georgia is a all-out assault on that right. And if I'm president, I'm going to appoint judges who understand the importance of that right. Who will uphold Roe v. Wade and do everything that I can to ensure that women have that right and that we protect not only reproductive freedom, but that we enhance reproductive justice. And this is the question on the Hyde Amendment. I don't believe that just because a woman is poor that she shouldn't be able to exercise that right to her own control over her body. And so I agree with doing away with the Hyde Amendment.
So you say you want to talk only about what you believe, but obviously you have to make a name for yourself on the debate stage. Is Joe Biden's back and forth on the Hyde Amendment an issue for you?
We're not on the debate stage yet.
No, we're on the town hall stage.
NBC has the debate,
all right.
Bret. All right.
You never know, down the road.
Let me just say that, look, I think what folks want to know is where we stand on the issues, and people are going to get a clear sense of the contrast that exists. But I have just found that, especially now, the #1 priority for voters is to understand what each of us believe as they try and sort this out. And so I don't want to distract right now by talking about other candidates when the fact is that I need to introduce myself to a lot of people who don't know who I am yet in this Democratic primary. And so I don't want them to know who Joe Biden is and what he stands for with this airtime. I want them to know what Julián Castro believes and what he thinks.
Okay, fair enough.
All right, let's go to Caleb Webb. Caleb? Caleb Webb? Well, the real Caleb Webb.
Hi, Secretary Castro. It's good to see you back here in Arizona. It was a pleasure meeting you during your time as mayor of San Antonio. However, though, our ever-growing national debt has been labeled as a potential national security concern and has already saddled future generations with a heavy shared load of that debt. As president, how will you work to pay down the federal debt, and what federal programs will you cut while implementing the progressive policies that you've set for yourself to accomplish?
Thanks a lot for the question. And as you probably know, as a mayor, you have to work with a balanced budget under state law. And so I certainly appreciate the need to ensure that future generations are not saddled with so much debt that it affects their ability to prosper in the United States in the future. I have 2 children of my own, my daughter Karina, who is 10, and my son Christian, who's 4. I want to make sure that they have a bright future. Part of that, of course, deals with the debt. At the same time, what we've seen during these last 2 years of this administration is very irresponsible tax cuts that gave $1.5 trillion to the wealthy and to wealthy corporations. If we want to talk about being fiscally responsible, the first thing that I would do is repeal and replace those tax cuts with legislation that actually improves the lot of the middle class and the working poor in this country. And on top of that, I also believe that all of our departments within the federal government should be subject to scrutiny in terms of how well they're spending their money, including the Department of Defense. You remember the $400 hammers and other misspending sometimes or overspending? I don't think any part of the federal government should be immune from that kind of scrutiny. When I was at HUD, That was certainly a concern for us to make sure that we were trying to spend money in a responsible way. And if there was a program or initiative that we were putting resources into, one of the things that I was big on was trying to measure how effective that investment was. I think that we need to do more of that in the federal government. And if I'm president, I would support that. So by being as thoughtful about those things on the spending side, and then being thoughtful about tax cuts that we don't need and how we're going to replace those, I think that we can do better than this president is doing right now, because this president has made the situation worse, not better.
So, but you support Medicare for all, you support free kindergarten, tuition-free public college, $15 minimum wage. So, you know, a lot of folks are going to look at you and say, how are you going to pay for all that, especially if you're going to get rid of the tax cuts, which a lot of people think have created a lot of jobs, stimulated the economy quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I would disagree with that. I don't think they, yeah, I mean.
Do you think the economy is pretty good right now?
Well, I don't think those tax cuts are what has led us to have a 3.6% unemployment rate. Those tax cuts were basically, and analysis after analysis has shown this, were way tilted toward the top 1% and to wealthy corporations. Folks may remember, for instance, that just a couple of months ago it was reported that Amazon, that made more than $11 billion in profit last year, didn't pay any federal tax. And then a couple of days later, there was a report about 60 different well-known American companies that had a profit and paid no federal tax. How is it that Amazon is paying less in taxes than you and your family? The reason for that is that we have our priorities wrong. We have our values wrong. So I would support a tax code that actually gets our values right and that boosts the middle class and the working poor instead of the top 1% and wealthy corporations. And to answer your question about, well, how are we going to pay for different initiatives that we want to do, during the course of this campaign, I am going to release my plan of how I would pay for these programs, because I do believe that the American voters are entitled to that. But just to give you kind of a preview of that, we need to repeal and replace those tax cuts. We need to raise the top marginal tax rate. We need to close different loopholes that these lobbyists that are hired by these powerful special interests in Washington, D.C. Always get worked into a 1,000-page document so that they can get theirs while you and your family don't. And I would also find other ways that are not necessarily in the tax rate to garner revenue. Just a quick example, when I was HUD Secretary, one of the things that we did was that we funded the National Housing Trust Fund. And we did that with a transaction fee on Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the government-sponsored entities. Took about $175 million to begin with, that was put into a fund that would invest in affordable housing for people who are extremely low income, the poorest of the poor, to be able to get into housing. That was not raising the tax rate or something else in that tax code. It was a different way to get at it. I would do all of those things to make sure that we're able to provide an effective way for people to prosper in this country.
That was a bit of closing statement there. You have a twin brother, Joaquin, who is a congressman. He's not here tonight, but we were told in San Antonio you were fooled some people one time because you switched places. So I want to make sure after this hour town hall that's very substantive that you are not Joaquin.
If I were my brother, I'd be a little bit uglier tonight.
Oh!
Now, you know, I'm very proud of Joaquin. He's on the Intelligence Committee. He's on the Foreign Affairs Committee. He is head of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. And Joaquin and I are very grateful for the opportunities that we've had in this country. You know, both of us love this country. We think that we live in the greatest country in the world. And my campaign is about telling Americans what I think we need to do to make it better than it's ever been before.
Mr. Secretary, we appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.